Would you pray with me? Open our ears, O God, to hear your word and know your voice. Speak to our hearts and strengthen our wills, that we may serve you today and always. Amen. I'm sure many of you here know the name Dag Hammarskjöld. He was a distinguished international leader in the 20th century and was the Secretary General of the United Nations for a number of years. And he was tragically killed in a plane crash in 1961. And in the remains, they found his briefcase, and they found three things that he always kept in his briefcase: a New Testament, a copy of the Psalms, and the Charter of the United Nations. You know, and often Christian members of the military are given a New Testament that has the Psalms with them. And there is no doubt that the Psalms are probably the most popular book in the Old Testament. At least that's the book that is most quoted by Christians. And unlike the rest of the Bible, the Psalms are addressed directly to God. It's often described as our words, humanity's words to God, and God's response to us. And they're kind of like, the Psalms are like this little prayer book that's kind of nestled in the middle of the Bible. And so even today, thousands of years later, they still express many of the deepest feelings that you and I have. They express our fear and our anger, our joy and our confusion, and our faith and our devotion. I think it's fair to say that probably every human emotion can be found somewhere in Psalms, and usually more than one of them. And you know, when they were originally created, some were meant as prayers and some were meant as songs. Many of them in ancient times were to be sung. And tradition has it that David wrote many of them. That sense kind of changed, even though the Bible still gives him credit for many of them. Apparently, David was quite musically inclined. And there's just too many themes in the Psalms to kind of summarize them all, and so they tend to do them by topic. There's Psalms that are of praise, and there's ones that are of thanksgiving. Others are lament and petition, and some are wisdom. And some of them speak from the voice of an individual, and others are the voice of an entire community. And I dare say that probably everyone here has a favorite psalm. Many of us, it's the 23rd Psalm, "The Lord is my shepherd." Or Psalm 51, "Have mercy on me, O God, making me a clean heart." And today we heard just about half of Psalm 139, which is also often one of our favorites. One of the verses we didn't hear this morning is verse 14, which I really love. It says, "For I am fearfully and wonderfully made." But this particular psalm that you heard this morning is making an adamant, pretty incredible, strident claim that God pretty much knows everything about us. It tells us that God knows what we do, where we go, what we think, what we say, all that we long for, and all that we need. The psalmist is saying that God is with us. So while much of the Bible is about the people, Israel, this is about you. This is about me. This is an individual psalm about us to us. And it's always fascinating to read what some of the commentaries have to say about this psalm. Here's what James Lindbergh said. He does it by telling a story because he says the Psalms are not mass-produced, they're custom-made. So he tells about the story about a young Rabbi Zusi who was quite discouraged about his failures and his weaknesses. And he said to the older rabbi, when you get to heaven, God is not going to say to you, why weren't you like Moses? No, God will say to you, why weren't you more like Zusi? So why don't you stop trying to be Moses and start being Zusi that God created you to be? So that's what this psalm is telling us, is that our identity, our sense of belonging to God, that we're an ongoing creation, that God is calling to us, to each one of us, again and again, to live out our unique gifts and our unique lives. So isn't that good news? And don't we need to hear it? Don't we need to know that God is with us no matter what? No matter what we say or what we do, God is with us, calling us and lifting us up. You all might know the name Peter Nomes, a dear departed theologian. Here's what he says. He says, because at the very bottom of the whole enterprise is the indisputable fact that we are created, made, formed, invented, patented in the image of goodness itself. That is what it means. That is how one translates being created in the image of God. It means being created in the image of goodness itself. Self-worth, self-esteem, self-value. These are not essays in mere ego. They are essays in divinity, the stuff of goodness and godliness. And it is in that image that provides a security and serenity in the world. So this psalm is trying to reassure us that no matter what, God knows us, each and every one of us. Even when we struggle to know ourselves, we are searched and known by God. So what does it mean to be searched? How is that different than being the one who does the searching? It says in this psalm that we're hemmed in. That means we're besieged, we're entrapped, we're encircled. God does not leave us alone. So here we have this incredible psalm that talks about who we are and that we're created and God knows everything about us. And one of the things we assume about the Psalms, unlike perhaps any other book of the Bible, is we assume that everybody agrees with it. Now, we're always taught to question, aren't we? To interpret and to study and to evaluate. But we somehow think when we recite the Psalms, everybody's on the same page. Maybe that's not true. Do we really believe in what this psalm is saying? Or do we say we do? We do give lip service to the notion. But we really don't think much about whether it's true or not. We just kind of recite them. Or do we just assume we're supposed to find ourselves in the Psalms, but we really never thought about whether we do or not? No, maybe I'm the only one who does that. But think about it. The first verses that we heard in this psalm convey the staggering idea that God knows us better than we know ourselves. And I don't know about you, I don't think there's many of us like the Samaritan woman at the well who was just in awe that Jesus told her everything about herself. You know, I love my mother dearly. But occasionally, I engaged in a fair amount of eye rolling where she was concerned. If she said it to me once, she said it to me a dozen times, I know you better than you know yourself. That would prompt me to groan, and I would almost roll my eyes right out of my head because I couldn't stand it when she said that. Because I wanted to say, no, you don't. No, you don't. Well, the truth is she really did know me pretty well, but that's beside the point. But the truth is not, no one knows everything about us. No one. No one is an open book. We all have things we never share with another human being. All of us. So does that include God? The Psalm says that God knows who we are. But I've been known to think I've kept a secret or two from God. Have you? Because, sometimes I'll pray and I'll admit something and I think, well, maybe God already knows that. I don't know. But I act as if God doesn't. And so do I really believe what this psalm is saying? My motto most of my life has been, I've got this. No matter what, I got this. Not exactly a ringing endorsement for believing in a God that knows me better than I know myself. I got this. Can any of you relate to that? Have you got this? So the question is, who is this God we believe in that we hear in this psalm? Most of us were taught about God growing up in church. Chances are, as we've gotten older, we've questioned some of the things we were taught growing up, and it's evolved or changed over time, and we believe a little bit differently today as adults. As we grew and questioned and wondered, we probably did reading and we studied and we investigated what different theologians had to say about God. Sometimes that helped, sometimes it didn't. Here's a few. Karl Barth, famous German theologian, he said that God is the unknowable and indescribable. God is personal, but personal in an incomprehensible way, insofar as the conception of his personality surpasses all our views of personality. It's like, okay. Now, Paul Tillich, another famed theologian, he had a lot of diverse ways of describing God, but the most persistent one is God is being itself. And then there's Dietrich Bonhoeffer, who asserted that God is the beyond in the midst of our lives. So is that a little too intellectual? A little too antiseptic? Struggling to wrap your arms around it? Sometimes. Well, and then, okay, we grew up learning about God, and we kind of wondered, do we believe that? Or maybe we believe this, and we've studied different theologians, and we listen pretty much to our minister. But none of that answers the questions, what do you believe about God? Who is the God that you believe in? And there's not a right or wrong answer to that. We're adamant about that. There's not a right or wrong answer to the God that you believe in. But regardless of our definition of God, do we believe that God calls us? How do we believe that God calls to us? Is it just ministers that God calls to, or people that seem really, really spiritual, or theologians? Does God call us all over and over again? So how does God call us? Well, I don't know the exact answer to that. But I know one of the times when I think God calls to us most. And that's in the stillness of the morning. I think that's when God calls to me. Or perhaps more accurately, that's when I can hear God calling. Think about what it's like in the morning. Well, this morning, for example. Did you wake up rested and kind of pad into the kitchen? My attire is a t-shirt and shorts, and I have my slippers on, and I turn on the coffee, and then I make the coffee, and I sit at the table, and I'm quiet. The morning's quiet in a different way than the nighttime. The stillness of the morning is full of promise and possibility. I always feel better in the morning than I do at night. I don't know what it is about sleeping or the stillness, but I can hear where sometimes at night I can't. So in that stillness of the morning, as you awaken to the dawning of the day, God is asking you to breathe in your uniqueness and your immeasurable worth, and God is asking you to listen to the call God is making on your life. Because I believe God does make a call on all our lives. And it's not to be judged. It's not to be criticized. It is to be embraced. You know, the last two verses that we heard, or the last two verses in the psalm, we heard the first 12 and then it jumped to the last two. And it's our call to God, asking God to do something for us. We've heard this psalm and its amazing message that we are beloved by God and called by God. And so then we say back to God, examine me, O God, and know my heart. Test me and know my thoughts. See if there is misdeed within me, and guide me in a way that is eternal. In the stillness of the morning. And so that's my challenge to you. In the stillness of the morning, to listen to God's call in your life. I know it's there. And I know you will hear it. And when you act on it, you will be a part of the world that changes things. I see you do it every day. So together, let's do that in the morning. Together.